Oh, sorry. Thank you all for attending tonight. Welcome to tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Rory Vaughan, the Chair of the Economy, Arts, Sports and Public Realm Policy and Accountability Committee. Before we begin, there are the usual housekeeping points to cover. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so by taking part you are consenting to be recorded. Please can officers introduce themselves before speaking for the first time? And if the fire alarm sounds either continuously or intermittently, I will adjourn the meeting. Officers will direct you to the assembly point in Shortlands Road. Please leave in an orderly fashion by the nearest exit, which is in the lift lobby and downstairs. So let's proceed to the agenda. The first item is apologies for absence. I've received apologies for absence from John Pixton and Councillors Jones, Holder and Collins. Are there any other apologies?
None, Chair, no.
Thanks, and you'll note that Councillor Borland is joining us tonight online. Welcome, Councillor Borland. Declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest? Okay, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. Do members of me agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of March 2023?
Sorry, I just have Chair, I just got one short point to make. At page 9, David PAC was to provide further information regarding the consultation undertaken at Christmas markets held in Hammersmith and North End Road. In fact, he has done that. It came by a separate email. But I didn't actually quite understand the questions which were asked. It seems to me that the questions were what I call leading questions, as opposed to asking someone their views of the
Yeah, sorry, you don't disagree with the minutes, though?
Well, I'm not sure whether it's been answered or not, that particular point.
No, but this is just the record of the minutes of the meeting, so that's agreed. I think that I think you're right that the action points have been followed up. I think it's obviously difficult for us to debate the merits or otherwise of those questions just at the moment, because we don't really have a matters arising, but certainly note your points there. So those are agreed. So moving on, agenda item 4, which is the update on the sport and physical activity strategy for Hammersmith and Fulham, and presenting are Simon Ignon and Paul Smith. So over to you. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Chair and Council members. My name is Simon Ignon. I'm the Assistant Director of Parks and Leisure, and I'm bringing this report to you on the update of the sport and physical activity strategy. May I have the first slide, please? Thanks, Rob. This report updates the committee on progress in developing a new 5-year sport and physical activity strategy. Following the recommendations of the Borough's Community Sport and Physical Activity Network presented in the last report to this committee in January, there's been further extensive engagement and consultation with the C-SPAN members, local sports organisations and stakeholders, including Education and Disability Forum representatives. And the strategy is now starting to come together with a draft action plan, and we're close to completion of it, but we're seeking your views this evening on the 5 priorities of the new strategy. Next slide, please. The strategy document will have 5 sections to it, including an introduction, vision and structure, lessons and successes and challenges from the previous strategy, devising and developing the priorities of the new strategy, an action plan, and then how we're going to monitor and achieve the strategy and evaluate the successes and challenges going forward. Next slide, please. So the strategy, vision and structure. Following a review of the last strategic priorities, looking at national strategies such as the Sport England one, and also looking at other strategies that influence our strategy, such as the public health and local joint needs, strategic needs assessment. We've come up with a vision and mission to become the most active borough in the UK and to promote and support and make sport and physical activity accessible to all. We will do this through 5 new streams of the new strategy, working with partner organisations to deliver our strategic action plan. Next slide, please. The previous strategy had 6 outcomes: tackling inactivity, children growing up with positive attitudes to sport, helping active people to remain so at lower cost to the public purse, support residents and the community to create more grassroots physical activity, creating improved physical environments that encourage increased activity, and develop an evidence-based approach to inform the policy. We had some significant successes on some of these strategic areas, but there are challenges to some of them. And as you will note from the 5 proposed themes of the new strategy, we have carried several of these forward because there's work ongoing in many of these areas together with our partners. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, in addition to the Sport England national framework for sport and physical activity, we've also reviewed other local strategies, including the health and wellbeing priorities for the borough, which are supporting good mental health for all, supporting children, young people and families to have their best possible start, addressing the rising tide of long-term conditions, particularly in older people, and building a sustainable health and social care system that is fit for all. Next slide, please. Just as an overview and an introduction to the Community Sport and Physical Activity Network, our core partners are those listed in red on the left-hand side of the table of the presentation, include different departments in Hammersmith and Fulham Council, key local contractors such as Greenwich Leisure Limited, who operate the 3 borough leisure centres, local governing bodies of sport such as the Lawn Tennis Association, and a range of other community sport providers. We also have a number of other key stakeholders that we consult with in between times and during the C-SPAN meetings, which are listed on the right-hand side. This is not an exhaustive list of our partners. Next slide, please. So following our research, development and consultation with C-SPAN, we've developed 5 new themes of the new sport and physical activity strategy. And I'll go through each one of those 5 with some of the items that are key to our local stakeholders and come from their plans as part of our action plan. Next slide, please. The first area of work for the new strategy is promoting accessible physical activity for those less active in the community. This continues to target the work that we continued from the last strategy on providing low-cost activities, access for every young child and person and family in the borough, building on our work with the GP exercise referral and obesity pathways, targeting inactive older adults and those that are socially excluded and isolated, and working on local partnerships tackling poverty and increasing opportunities, particularly for girls and women's sport and physical activity. Next slide, please. The second area, work stream, is about providing opportunities for every child to have a positive, we're changing this word, I'm sorry, there's a typo both in the slide and on the report, that changing from the last strategy of a positive attitude to a positive experience to sport and physical activity. This is working with our local schools to improve and increase swimming opportunity, ensuring every child has the opportunity to participate in rowing with the key facility of the Thames right on our doorstep, increasing school usage of our park sports facilities, and linking with active school travel plans to encourage active travel for young people and their families. Next slide, please. The third area is maintaining provision for those already active to remain so. This is ensuring that we have facilities fit for purpose across the borough and easily accessible, ensuring clubs and other sports organisations have the training and support to increase their club activities, exploring where other resources can be found from outside of the council to enable further investment in facilities over the longer term, and ensuring that grants programmes that are available in the borough support talented young sports people, local sports clubs and local facilities. Next slide, please. The fourth theme is around supporting our communities. The council cannot do this on our own, and we value and appreciate and need the support of all our community sport providers to develop more grassroots sports and physical activity provision. This is strengthening and building on the community sport and physical activity network, supporting the volunteer workforce, referees, coaches, volunteers, supporters of all the sports activities delivered in the borough, working with our friends and other stakeholders in parks, and mapping existing voluntary and community sports organisations that aren't traditional sports organisations that provide other physical activity opportunities, and ensuring that the community sector has the skills and development to sustain and grow physical activity in the borough. Next slide, please. The fifth and final area of the new strategy theme is about improving our environment to ensure that it can help and support an increase in physical activity and sports provision. So it's working with schools and local colleges, ensuring our environments, whether they're parks or the water, such as the River Thames, and access is safe and activities are accessible to all, and investing in our built sports facilities and ensuring that local private sports and other organisations are available to general public as well. Next slide. So our next steps in moving our strategy forward is that we wish to confirm these 5 strategic themes, finalise the action plan and strategy with our cabinet member next month, and then produce a document that is available to go out to consultation widely across the community during September for a 4 to 6 week period, bringing those thoughts back through our community sport and physical activity network to our cabinet member at the end of the year, and bringing the final strategy and report through to PAC in January 2024. Next slide, please. So I hope members, providing you with confidence and reassurance that we're well on the way to developing the new sport and physical activity strategy. It's a vital area and service within our community, and the council, working with our partners, aim to build on the successes of the last strategy and deliver a successful and accessible sport and physical activity programme over the next 5 years. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ignon. So, members of the committee, are there any? Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for that. Just a couple of observations. Thank you very much for that and producing the display which you've done. I've had a chance to look at it earlier. I just wanted to make a few points actually, if I could, and some of them not really questions, but first of all, linking in with your work, because you've got there that you're in parks and leisure, it's just how do we include the parks in it? And I say that because last week, congratulations to everybody, but we got another, what do they call, Green Flag Award, didn't we, for Wormwood Scrubs? And Chair, if I may indulge, on Friday morning, I went for a butterfly walk around Wormwood Scrubs. Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And I would urge people to go on that every Friday. But the facilities there, the person that showed us around, absolutely brilliant, really educational for me, but also for local residents. So that's a great opportunity. And I've mentioned this before, but I did know that Wormwood Scrubs was particularly used by young people during the pandemic. And whilst we need to protect those environments, I think the strategy needs to look creatively at that. So that's one thing. Second thing, I was pleased to see rowing down. We've got the River Thames here, so that's great. And accessing that to all young people. I just wondered, though, are there any perceived gaps that you can't get everything, can you, in a consultation? But I'm thinking of things like skateboarding, mountain biking. For me, walking football, of a certain age when you can't run around anymore. But I just wondered whether that list you put up, and are there others that we've missed on that? And then that just goes to the tight time frame you've got. I think you have to stick to that, obviously, because that's what you've identified. But the month of September will be busy then, won't it, to consult with various stakeholders to make sure that they can all input in their different ways into the strategy. does seem a little bit tight to me, but I think we need to think about that and need to think about how we do go out to our communities other than just those sort of clubs and, traditional, Queen's Park Rangers or whatever, just to think if we're engaging with some other groups. And I'll finally say that because I often in this group mention young people, and I think that sometimes we need to make sure that we're accessing their views, everybody actually, all citizens of the borough, it doesn't matter what age they are, but particularly for young people, so that we make it sort of fresh, agile, interesting for them to be committed to. But thank you for all the work you're doing on that, and good luck with the project. I'll be very interested to hear from the consultation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Did you want to respond to any of those points?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just come back on a few generic points, but just to reassure you on the final point about engaging with young people, we work closely with Hammersmith, Young Hammersmith and Fulham, which are on our kind of key stakeholder and consultation groups. And an example of that is obviously skateboarding happens in places like Bishop's Park, and we've had a good relationship with those kind of less traditional sport forms. And there's at least 3 organisations that we've worked with on skateboarding in Bishop's Park, so we'll be able to ensure that traditional and non-traditional sports, although skateboarding being at the Olympics in 2024 next year, is obviously going to have a high profile going forward. So we need to make sure that you're correct, that we engage all sports and areas of physical activity. I think the tight time frame, we'll start consulting at the end of September, but it will last for a minimum of 4 weeks and ideally 6. So it will go on to kind of the end of October, and then we'll consolidate all the information we've had back in during November and then start to form the report back and the actual final strategy. So we believe we've got sufficient time, and because we've already been talking to some of the organisations, they know that this is coming down the line and will align with their strategies as well. And finally on rowing, a key sport, it was a manifesto pledge, so we've specifically included that in the strategy, but I'm keen to ensure that generally children have a good experience of a lot of sports. They need to swim before they can go rowing on the Thames, obviously, athletics, gymnastics, all those kind of key sports activities at an early age, the physical education side of things before they then go on to practice their particular sports and disciplines is important. And Wormwood Scrubs is a fantastic hub in the north of the borough, as busily used in the summer for sports. If you go up there on a Saturday, you'll find many young people taking part in baseball and softball. Go up there in the winter, and it's football and rugby, and we've got Gaelic football, rounders, and various schools obviously using Linford Christie Stadium as well. So it is the kind of the mecca for sports activities, and we need to balance that with the biodiversity and nature needs up there. And with, I guess, having that shared hat and responsibility, I can ensure my teams are working together to deliver that.
Thank you. Councillor Patel.
Chair, it seems that the challenge is to get young people away from the screen and onto the playing fields. With that in mind, is there any reason why the community support providers doesn't include any schools? And secondly, one of the things which you mentioned was that the schools are being encouraged to use public parks. Is there any strategy towards that? Because I think I've asked that question at one of the previous meetings, and I would like to have some guidelines on that if possible.
Thank you, Chair. Taking the second point first, we do have schools using our park facilities already. It was one of the recommendations coming out of the Parks Commission was to ensure that certainly state schools had affordable and access to our local park facilities. This is becoming even more key, linking in with the climate change agenda, and I've been working with 1 or 2 other councillors recently around schools that are bussed out of the borough to find playing fields and trying to make sure that they have access to our facilities within walking distance, which some of them are, to try and reduce the carbon footprint of some of our private schools who are bussing them out as well. So it's trying to be a balance to get a use of our park facilities for state schools, but also trying to have an impact on that as well going forward. We have limited park resources for everybody to participate in, and it's a challenge at times finding the right balance between members of the public playing on our tennis courts or in our sports fields at the same time as allowing them to be used by schools. But having brought the sports bookings facility back in-house from our grounds maintenance contractor at the start of the lost contract, we're working through the new electronic booking scheme, but also the prioritisation and a policy to ensure that our state schools get the number one priority, but that we're also supporting our private schools to reduce their carbon emissions for travelling out of the borough to access high quality sports facilities. And to that aim, we are investing in our weather facilities in Hurlingham Park, and also replacing the ones up at Linford Christie Stadium. And all being well, we've got a grant through the King's Coronation Youth Fund to improve our athletics track again, to make sure it's fit for purpose for all our school sports days next summer, and also the Thames Valley Harriers Athletics Club. I think I've missed your first point, Councillor Patel, so I'm sorry. I don't know if you could reiterate that.
Thank you very much for that reply. The first point was in the members of CSPAN, I noticed there aren't any schools. Is that a deliberate omission?
No, it's not, but they generally struggle because they're in the middle of the school day when we have our meetings. So we have the school games organizer, and he is our kind of mouthpiece and voice piece within predominantly the local primary schools and secondary schools. And he organises all the inter-school sports competitions. So through him, we have a direct link on the C-SPAN, but outside of the C-SPAN, we're working with local primary schools and secondary schools week in, week out, through my colleague Paul and Debbie, who are delivering programmes like the London Youth Games and making sure that schools are linked into local sports clubs and represent the borough through things like the London Youth Games that happened, or the finals just happened just the other weekend. So it's difficult to get secondary schools and primary schools on the C-SPAN due to clashes of work programme, but it doesn't mean we're not working with them.
Councillor Borland, did you have any questions?
Yes, please. Hope everyone can hear me okay. Actually, a lot of what I wanted to ask around was about how we manage our spaces, which you've just kind of covered quite a lot of it. I know that we already have a lot of pressure on particularly our green spaces. And there's kind of two things that I was thinking about. One, making sure that actually there is enough green spaces left for people that is not organised sport, because not all being active doesn't mean playing a game of rugby necessarily. Obviously that is, but also it's going for a walk. It might be many things. So making sure how we're making sure that we keep enough of our green spaces just for kind of free use. And then I also wondered whether we had any, because obviously, again, as I said, we have huge pressures on our spaces, wondered whether we'd taken any consideration of maybe repurposing more kind of industrial sites, say, such as a skateboard park under the flyover, or some in these kind of spaces that aren't obviously for kind of activity. I wondered if there's any consideration for those.
Thank you, Councillor, for those questions, and could hear you loud and clear in the room. Yes, informal recreation within our parks and open spaces along the Thames path and using the cycle networks through our borough are vital, both for active commuting and active travel, as well as daily walks, daily jogs, runs. We also have things like Park Run, which also encourage people to park walk now in the south of the borough, in Bishop's Park, as well as in Wormwood Scrubs. So keeping a network and a link between our green spaces is vital for that. And we have had a number of led walk programs in the past, and walking is certainly a key feature of our physical activity program. Moving on to kind of repurposing other spaces, we did look at a regeneration scheme under one of the flyovers in the borough, but unfortunately we weren't successful with the government grant for that. But that kind of project remains, oven ready, so to speak. So if a new funding stream comes out that we are eligible and can apply for, then we will look to improve and update that. We are looking at upgrading a number of our multi-use games areas or ball pens in our parks, as well as ensuring that those that exist on our housing estates are also well signposted so that people can use those spaces. And on the informal side of things, looking at increasing the number of outdoor gyms in our parks and spaces so that if people can't get or can't afford, the private gyms or even our public gyms in the borough, where we've got 3 or 4 sites, then they can exercise on equipment that helps them build their fitness, strength and conditioning in parks and open spaces for free as well.
That sounds great. Thank you very much.
Did you have any further points you wanted to make, Councillor Morland?
No, I thank you for putting the report together. It sounds exciting, and I think a more active borough will be great for everyone. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So just come to, I think there's a lot to digest, and thank you for bringing the report back to us this evening. Just so let's start off with 2 or 3 things. One of the things that we're sort of eager to ensure is that there's sort of been co-production, particularly with disabled residents and others. And we certainly had a presentation at the most recent Strategy and Oversight Board, I think that's what it's called, which brings together the sort of chairs of the PACs. And we had a presentation on co-production. I understand there's now a sort of central, we're not going to be doing the full sort of co-production on every topic, but I think the central team there has created a sort of central checklist in respect of some of the steps to take in respect of co-production. So be interested to know if you've taken any of those steps, or if those can be, I think we'd be keen to see some of the learning from that and some of those steps taken into account in sort of the further development of the strategy. So that was sort of the first point. Second point was, I noticed it's very helpful in the presentation. Obviously, a number of the priorities are sort of similar or effectively the same as some of the priorities that were in the previous strategy. So I'd be interested in understanding some of the lessons that you might have learned from the previous strategy that might go into the sort of execution of the new strategy. Taking as an example, really sort of promoting accessible physical activity for those who've been less active, and wondering what was learned from how we've sort of done it in the past few years that we'll be taking forward into this strategy. Sort of, and following on from that, I've got some more after this, so perhaps leave it at these 3 for now. This may be a lessons learned, but interested in understanding what the sort of measuring outcomes will be like. Obviously, we're trying to get, I think there's a sort of combination here of people engaged in sports in particular, but also encouraging them to do physical activity and sort of to raise those levels. But what are the sort of measures that we're likely to be looking at?
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to reassure you on co-production, we'll certainly take the lessons learned centrally. We do already engage with the Disability Alliance within the borough, and we'll ensure that they are involved in kind of particular workshops or forums as part of the consultation, as in addition to the survey that will be online that anybody can access and respond to, as well as writing out to other groups. We also link in, as you'll notice on the C-SPAN, with other kind of high priority target groups, so whether that's the Dementia Action Alliance as well, and obviously previously mentioned Young Hammersmith and Fulham to ensure young people are engaged. But we'll certainly ensure that we're aligning with the council strategy on co-production. The lessons learnt from the previous strategy, just referring to my notes here. So we did have a number of targeted programs working with particular community groups. Dance West has been a very key partner for the council sports development and physical activity team, using all forms of dance to engage with a wide variety of people that haven't taken part in sport or physical activity. And they've done a number of programs, from dance in our park to working with particular targeted groups, as well as having the wonderful new base they now have at the Sands End Arts and Community Centre, which is their permanent base, but they then hire and distribute their activities and opportunities across the borough, and have a very inclusive programme that's our support. We work with an organisation called London Sport Trust that do a lot of work, outreach work on behalf of the sports development team, both in schools and doing a lot of our estates-based programmes. we just continue to deliver and keep rolling those through, because of the cohorts of children grow up and move on to different things and activities. So our partnership with them is key going forward. And yes, I think it is continuing to engage with children through different forms, whether it's the daily mile in school, making sure that they're walking a mile a day if they aren't walking to school, or using active travel, getting the very least active, and then ensuring they have positive experiences, which is either into-school, intra-school or into-school competition as well for those more able, and providing them with exit routes to local sports clubs going forward. They're some of the key lessons that we've learned and that we continue to build on and develop. I think the other key area is around continuing to support our community workforce, the volunteers. We have a huge number of volunteer hours out there delivering on our behalf, or on behalf of the borough and all our sports organisations, and it's making sure that they are valued, which we try and do through our annual or biannual sports awards ceremony, where we highlight the good work of and many hours and years of practice that people have put in, as well as putting on an ongoing training programme, whether that's first aid, child protection courses, safe practices, and supporting governing bodies putting in their coaching programmes. And then finally, with outcomes and measures, the top outcome measure is really the Active Lives survey that Sport England undertake every 6 months, where they survey up to 500 people in each borough across the country. That has highlighted in the last iteration that we are the second most active borough in London, and one of the highest percentages of those that are active for their measure of 30 minutes so many times a week. That's the headline measure, but underneath that we'll be looking at satisfaction surveys, participation rates, working with our leisure centres, looking at how many members they've got, what's their throughput and participation rates, and looking at the number of sports bookings that we have from teams and organisations. So there are a number of key performance indicators we can put in place to look to how we measure this going forward, as well as working with our other partners in health organisations.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Very comprehensive answer. I'd be interested perhaps to follow up on some of those surveys and other measures that you're looking at in sort of future, when we're probably looking at sort of analysing how well the strategy has sort of delivering in due course. I mean, actually, it brings me on to communication. Something you've just said is really how we're communicating some of this. I mean, obviously through the partners that we're working with, presumably, but I wonder more widely if you could just explain how we're communicating the opportunities that are there. I mean, actually, one of the things perhaps we haven't picked up on it enough is maybe making more, if we aren't, of the sports awards, and also maybe use news items on the council's website or whatever, showing the support that you're talking about in terms of supporting those community volunteers who are out there delivering sports sort of day to day and week to week. Even if that will be, as you say, through the sort of delivering training on first aid and other things. So I'd be interested in if you've got some comments on communicating this and how we're communicating at the moment. Certainly I know, for example, the Summer in the City activities are, I think, fairly well communicated at the moment, some of which include a lot of sports options as well, which hopefully are being well taken up. So interested in some things on some of your thoughts on communications, and I think that's key, and I wonder whether we can make perhaps more of that going forward, and sort of celebrating some of the achievements where there are those. One other question as well is just, I mean, obviously we are considering what we deliver in the borough, but obviously we're thinking about our residents. They're possibly going to access activity and sports, particularly on sort of fringes of the borough, and I wonder how well I wonder if you've got anything quite to say about how we're working with others, particularly those that are just outside Hammersmith and Fulham. Given our sort of geography, clearly we've got very porous boundaries in a number of places. I mean, in the north of the borough, for example, we're very close to Acton, and say Shepherd's Bush Cricket Club is in Acton, but a 2-minute walk from our boundaries, for example, and presumably vice versa, that Wormwood Scrubs or whatever is very close to Brent and Acton boundaries. So I wonder if there's any comment on how we're working with organisations that are sort of just over our borders, but which are being sort of potentially accessed by our residents, and they can sort of access their physical activity there.
Yeah, just tackling that second question first. As part of the new strategy, we will be providing a leisure facilities needs assessment, as well as a playing pitch strategy, working with Sport England and consultants to deliver both of those reports. And that will look at migration of participants both in and out of the borough, and where neighbouring leisure centres are, swimming pools, artificial grass pitches and playing pitches. Because yes, you're quite right. You know, our residents are transient. You know, they may work in other boroughs, live in ours, and they will participate in sport and physical activity, you know, in our borough near where they work, or using active travel in between the two. Obviously, we will just spend our resources on those clubs and activities within our borough boundaries, some of which have names linked to the borough and others of which don't. And obviously, our priority booking that I was talking about earlier, yeah, we do have schools outside of our borough using our facilities, and they are charged for that benefit, which then helps subsidise, you know, our state schools. And similarly with outer borough clubs and inner borough clubs, you know, charging rates as well. But we can work and look to influence, and some of those kind of different facilities that, you know, we might not provide, but they're on our boundaries, then we will signpost people to those. We also work very closely, sports development officers across all the London boroughs. There are regular forums sharing opportunities for that. And then we obviously collaborate on things like the London Youth Games, where every London borough takes part, and we, you know, signpost people to young people to different sports opportunities. But those two strategic documents will look at, you know, key facilities on our boundaries, and what key facilities we've got and which attract, and where other facilities people travel to. I think with communication, we can always do more and use all different formats. You're probably right. We don't celebrate enough what we do, perhaps throughout the year. Yeah, we have a press release after the Sports Awards, which Paul on my left, you know, delivered very well this last year. And it's, you know, with the limited resources, can we do it annually or not going forward? Or if not, what can we do in between the years to support that? Working with our partners like GLL or Virgin Active, so we can look into, you know, better publicity and promotion, and revamping the council's website. We do share some of our data across London, so that there are websites and apps that you can type in cricket and find out where the local cricket clubs and organisations are. So the data that we have are in those apps and those hubs. And London Sports, who are the kind of the overall body within London that look to promote and deliver sport, you know, are certainly championing those apps and making sure that GLL share when their exercise classes are on, and we need to make sure that any exercise classes we've got on in Linford Christie or other opportunities in our parks are also on those kind of apps, so that people have easy access to that data and information, which, you know, is changing annually and being updated, and we just need to make sure we're up to date with those kind of information. But, you know, both of those points, you know, are very valid and will be picked up through the strategy.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, I think that it would be great to celebrate some of the work that people are doing, particularly community volunteers. I mean, I know that GLL had some sort of awards evening last week. Unfortunately, I was unable to attend. But obviously, it'd be good to make sure that those sorts of things are publicised, where people are, you know, achieving, and also while celebrating participation and everything else as well, really, so that well, also hopefully in terms of officers see the fruits of their labours in terms of their strategy. That should be you know, celebrated as well, as much as possible. But I think, I mean, in summary, I won't go into all the points, but I think we very much welcome the hard work that's gone into the strategy. So thank you to all of you, for presenting tonight, and all of those who've worked on it. Looks like there's a little bit further to go, obviously, in terms of the consultation and then putting this in place later in the year. But certainly very fully behind the priorities that have been set out, and we look forward to sort of hearing more about it in sort of 6 months' time in terms of the final strategy, but then sort of seeing how the strategy plays out over the course of time, and seeing hopefully some of the great results that we hope, and the achievements that the strategy will bring, and hopefully will be number one in London before too long, and maybe in the country. For physical activity, but we'll hope to celebrate that in due course. But obviously, there's a lot of work to do before then. But certainly, thank you for bringing the report, and good luck with the taking the strategy through. Thank you. So, thank you for that. Let's move on to another strategy. for tonight, which is the draft tree strategy. And I understand the presenting officers are here with us, Ian Hawthorne, Jessica Bastock and Eugene McGee. So thank you for coming tonight, and we look forward to your presentation and the comments that we'll receive afterwards.
Good evening, Chair, and thank you, committee, for the invite to speak tonight. My name is Eugene McGee. I'm one of 3 highways tree officers. Myself and Jess and the team have been working on the tree strategy with a lot of input from internal and external stakeholders. So thank you to them as well. If we could open the presentation. Okay, so before I update you on the tree strategy and our progress, I'd just like to set some context, if I may. Why do we need a tree strategy? So in 2019, H&F declared a climate emergency, and they committed to achieving or reducing carbon emissions to net zero by 2030. It's known that trees are highly efficient at sequestering carbon, and that is our job, to manage trees, and that's where we can play an active role in this shared target. Trees are so efficient at doing this. They've now found their way into central policy. There's national policies which outline how we should be managing our trees, and there's also global policies which now outline how we should be managing our trees. So this is also evident in the publication of the Trees and Woodland Strategy Toolkit, which was commissioned by DEFRA, which is what we've used to guide the design of our tree strategy. So next slide, please. Our tree strategy follows the structure. We have a vision. Our vision is to contribute to becoming one of the greenest boroughs. How we propose that we achieve this vision is to achieve objectives and propose an action plan which helps us achieve these objectives. Can we go next slide, please?
Okay, so I'll take over from here. My name is Jessica Bastock. I am the service manager for the Healthy Streets team. So I'm going to walk through what the document is. So as Eugene said, we have a vision, and that's to contribute to being the greenest borough in England. And we see trees as being a big part of that. And the tree strategy is our roadmap to doing that. So as part of this vision, we've identified 3 main areas that we focus on, which is increasing the canopy cover, preserving and improving the tree stock that we have, and working closer and fostering partnerships with our stakeholders and residents as well. Next slide, please. So from these 3 objective areas, we drill down to a further 12 subsections, and through research and through internal discussions with colleagues. So even though today here we're from the tree section in a way, we have colleagues in planning, housing, parks, education that we need to discuss with. And in terms of this internal review, we have then produced these 12 separate areas. So if we take, for instance, increasing canopy cover. So to increase canopy cover, we've identified that we need to map the areas that we've got. So if we take parks, for instance, parks used for a multi-use areas, from sports to meadows for biodiversity. So we have to make sure that we know where we can plant trees. And it's the same for on our streets. Our streets are full of utilities and services and different street furniture. So again, we have to map these areas to understand what we can plant where. And then that follows on to funding. So funding is an area that becomes part of this strategy. How do we fund this increase in canopy cover? And the same as legacy planting. So we do plant quite a few whips and saplings in the borough. We don't classify them as a tree when they go in, but they will become a tree. So how do we manage those in the future? And then also private land. So how can we encourage residents, businesses, large landowners such as TfL and Network Rail? How can we then encourage those people to start to plant on their land? And then under preserving and improving what we've got, we pick up more of our climate change topics, so things like increasing biodiversity. So we need to start looking, when we replant a tree, so a tree that has died, how, instead of planting what was there, can we plant a native species and start to increase our amount of native species that we plant? Look at development opportunities and what can we do more with development in terms of TPOs, and ensuring that we start to engage at a pre-app stage on developments more in terms of trees. Developing policy. So we have policies in terms of what we plant, how we undertake our works, but through our internal review, we've realized that we're missing certain things like a waste strategy. So we produce a lot of waste with trees when we fell trees. So we ideally want to keep that waste in the borough. We want to use it within our parks and open spaces and our housing land. So we need to develop a policy on waste. The same for veteran trees. We don't have a policy for that. And also whip management plan. So we need to further these things. And lastly, in terms of preserving and improving what we've got, is training. So that's internal. So training officers and wider officers. So not just within the tree section, it might be our highways colleagues or parks officers, but also our contractors. So even contractors who may not be like the arboricultural contractor, it may be like our highways contractor. How do they better work around trees? What do we need to, upskill them on to be able to make sure they know how to best work? And in terms of working with residents and our stakeholders, we're looking at improving communication, especially our website, in terms of the information that we can show on there. So we need to share more data in terms of what we fell and what we plant, for instance. That should be accessible on the website. We have that information. We need to put it out there. The same as TPOs. We really need to have a map of all our TPOs and have that on the website so people can see this. Education is another one we've kind of identified, and to pick up on the last case that was said in terms of booking forest schools. We have forest schools. We think they're somewhat underutilized. So if we have a booking system and we promote that and we encourage more schools and communities, even nurseries, to start to use that facility. And then we think things like community projects, we need to do more across the whole council, so whether that's housing and parks and highways, and that may be things like watering projects. So one of our actions that we would like to take forward is a tree watering project. And then community engagement as well. That's something that we really need to do more on with trees, and whether that's undertaking tree walks in the borough and working closer with our community and creating tree warden scheme is something we would like to take forward as part of this. That was just a quick run through of some of the things in the action plan and the document. There's more detailed information. If we go to the next slide, please. So this slide, apologies, there's a lot of small text in here, but it's more to show the sort of development of the vision. So on the left-hand side is the aim. So showing here is preserving and improving what we have. And then we have the 4 subsections that we've identified as areas. And then it's to show that this all feeds through to the on the right-hand side, which is the action point. So everything is linked together. There shouldn't be an action in the action plan that is just random. Everything is linked through to those 3 key objective areas. Okay, the next slide, please. Eugene.
So this is an example of what the document might look like, where we go into a bit more detail about that particular subcategory. At the top, you'll see the main objective there is increasing canopy cover. We go into some detail about the funding available. We may or may not reference the key policy drivers here. We're looking for some input from you and from consultation on that. And then that drills down to the individual actions into a bit more detail about what actions we perceive we can deliver in order to achieve that particular objective. Like Jess said, this will be paired with an action plan document, which costs and allocates each particular action to a department with support, with timeframes. It really kind of operationalizes the action plan. So next slide, please. So this is where we are. We're finalizing our draft, and we're now outsourcing kind of graphic design. We're looking for final input and final consultations, and of course, input from yourselves. And I'll just mention that throughout this process, we've had consultation with the Tree Council, which are the authors of the Tree and Woodland Strategy Toolkit, which was commissioned by DEFRA, which is the fulfilment of obligation or a commitment made by the government in the England Trees Action Plan, where they would provide local authorities with the guidance to produce tree strategies. And next slide, please. So like I said, consultations ongoing, internal and external. On the left is kind of the range of stakeholders internally, with their particular kind of niches, and externally we have consulted with Forestry Research, Tree Economics, Trees for Streets, Gentian, Green Talk, and lastly the Tree Council, who will look for kind of final guidance on that. But yeah, this strategy is an ongoing thing. We'll be hopefully consulting with these external bodies throughout that whole process. So I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Patel.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions. Can you give us some idea of what the likely costs are involved in this tree strategy? I say that because at the moment, as you know, we're all going through a pretty tough time with the cost of living and the high inflation and interest rates, etc. To what extent are we relying on private funding to assist with that venture? So that's the first question. The second question is, I was actually surprised that the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham is the 28th greenest borough out of 33 London boroughs. I thought, I was really surprised at that, because where I live, certainly there's a lot of greenery around the place. So it'd be nice to have some feedback on that. And lastly, could you give us some information about the private land? I mean, at page 38 of this report, there's a vision of planting 1 tiny forest per year and promoting forest school. How many forest schools do we have in the borough at the moment?
Thank you, Councillor Patel. Just addressing your first question on funding. Thankfully, there are a lot of funding opportunities available. We have 2 current applications in process at the moment. One is the Urban Tree Challenge Fund, for which we have been successful 2 consecutive previous years. Another one is the Local Authority Treescapes Fund, which is to the sum of £50,000 plus off the top of my head. So we will be looking for external funding where possible. All of these action points are costed. Whether we deliver on them or whether they are accepted by everybody involved is not decided, but we have costed them. So we will look for external funding, but the majority of it will be funded internally.
Just on the funding, I think a lot of the actions that we've identified, we can incorporate as business as usual as well. So, you know, as I mentioned, the tree service is sort of across many departments. So colleagues in planning, climate change, parks. And I think with the action plan, as the actions have been costed and built by the service that are delivering them, we've started to look at what resources do we have within all these services that we can actually undertake some of this as part of business as usual. So things like the communications, bids, those type of actions in there, we think we can incorporate as part of our normal business. But yeah, and things like Eugene's mentioned, like tree planting, we are active in undertaking external bids. It's something we hope to do more of through a variety, not just for funding specifically for trees, but whether it's projects through TfL on highways, for instance, or projects in parks, which may access Greater London Authority money. We will always incorporate more tree planting where applicable. So it's through a variety of sources.
And to address your second question, excuse the reference of 28th greenest borough. This refers to access to green space, so that needs to be reworded, and that'll be taken into account when we finalise the draft. But yeah, to my surprise, we are 28th in terms of access to green space, so that's something that should be celebrated. Question number 3, RE private land. At the moment, the only kind of say we have on private land is by protecting the trees through the planning system, or by encouraging people to plant on private land, or advising or training or educating. And also working with kind of these stakeholders that we share assets with, such as TfL and similar, for these shared assets, and even our neighbours in other boroughs. If there's any kind of private land that we could maybe influence tree planting on, we'd like to look into that.
And just picking up your point on the tiny forests. So we have a couple of tiny forests in the borough already. We will be looking not only within parks where they've predominantly been so far, but also our housing estates. So I think a couple of housing estates has been identified of where we could put tiny forests. And in terms of forest schools, I cannot give you the full number. I know there's one at Wormwood Scrubs. I may refer to Simon to see, is that, yeah, so definitely one at Wormwood Scrubs. But this is something that we really do want to push and try and encourage more schools and nurseries to book these spaces, and clubs, wider after school clubs as well within the borough.
Councillor Lang.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting presentation, and I think it was very good that you put the context at the beginning, and I think we should always do that, given what's going on in our world at the moment. We've seen the hottest week in the history of our universe. And look what's going on in Greece and look what's going on in other parts of the world, which aren't being reported on quite so much at the moment. You might be interested anecdotally to note that as a new councillor, I can say that I've been doing it just over a year. A lot of my casework, a lot of the contact from residents is about trees. So let me just give you 3 examples anecdotally from literally the last couple of weeks. One is somebody saying that we pruned the trees at the wrong time of the year, right? Secondly, somebody was asking for some trees that had died last year because of the drought to be taken down and replaced. And the third one, which is quite interesting, and this only came about a week ago, and I've told them I'm coming to this meeting tonight, it's a group of residents from a road that are saying, how can they get trees planted in their road? Now, I know that because something about that, because my road that I live in, long before I became a councillor, 6 or 7 years ago, was transformed by the council having the, not just the initiative, but the vision to plant trees and accede to the residents' requests. And it has totally changed the area and adjoining streets as well. So people love trees. And I think it's good that you're doing that. What I would say, though, is that only at the end of the draft that you sent out did I see any dates. And I wonder whether your draft, I know it's only a draft, could be strengthened with some key time points on it. And going back to what the chair was saying earlier about another strategy, with how do we communicate this? So, for example, how do I tell people who to contact if they're approaching me about trees? And obviously, this exciting new project. Now, we want to be very positive, but we also want to not raise expectations that we can't deliver on, particularly, given financial situations. Planting trees is quite expensive, but nevertheless, we want to encourage that. So I think it would be good if there were some named people, again, perhaps through the council website, that people could go to for that. And finally, could you tell me, I didn't quite catch, who are the Tree Council? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Just addressing your last question, the Tree Council are a committee put together by DEFRA. It's formed to provide the local authority guidance or design this tree and woodland strategy toolkit. And that is essentially to fulfill a commitment made in the England Trees Action Plan 21, where they committed to providing the guidance for local authorities to design tree strategies. But the council itself is made up of professionals, leading professionals that we have quite a good working relationship with. So they're great people.
We completely agree on the communication. We're sort of hidden in the shadows a little bit. So as I mentioned, one of the streams is on communication and to have a more visible presence. So currently it's a bit of a generic web page that we realise doesn't really do the job. So there is a key piece around communication around. We have ideas of we inspect all of our trees once every 3 years in line with that policy, and we should have on there when we're inspecting each ward, because we do it by a ward basis. The officers move round, and when the officers are on the streets, residents obviously come and talk to them and ask them what they're doing and get further information. So we really want to put up when we're inspecting and also when works are likely to be undertaken and why. So picking up your inquiry around the dead tree. So, we want to have information on the website about, or produce information on when we replant trees and what our procedure is and how people can contact us to inform us of this, and to have all of that ready. So, people can engage closer with us.
I'll just come back on one point about communication. I mean, is there any mileage in you considering, say, in the north, the middle, the centre and the south of the borough, to have a sort of open event in a park maybe, or not even in a park, in a street, and to invite people on a completely different matter? my fellow councillor and I in our ward ran an open meeting not that long ago, not to do with this, although trees did come up. And we got a very good attendance. So there is an appetite, I think, within the community to hear and listen and learn, but also to put their point of view forward. And again, I go back to that idea about not raising expectations too much, but on the other hand, to engage people. I think actually you might find, I mean, I'm probably already thought of it, but you might find actually you might get some good public engagement. You've got, I don't know what they're called again, the Tree Council or something down to talk, and I think that might make quite an interesting, quite powerful part of the strategy moving forward. But anyway, that's just a suggestion. Thank you.
No, thank you. It's a great suggestion. And it's something I know our PAC's colleagues do quite well as well. And that's something we would like to pick up on, is having those area meetings, same as housing, like resident group meetings, and the tree officer goes along to those residents meetings when residents would like to focus on trees and open space. So yeah, appreciate that, and something we would include.
Thank you. Councillor Borland, did you have any comments and questions?
It was interesting to hear actually that you do it ward by ward. It would be fantastic if that information could even just make it to ward councillors. It does, as Councillor Lang said, it does come up a lot, either in casework or on the doorstep. And I wondered whether there was any opportunity, because quite often people say, how can we get a tree? Can we contribute to trees, for our road? Have we got any kind of, buy a tree for your road? Is that an option? Can you actually do that? Can you crowdfund along your street to get a few trees? It feels like we've got some, incredibly privileged streets and areas in our borough, and maybe they could buy a couple of their own trees and free up some budget for extra trees in other places. And my other question was, it's vaguely selfish or self-interested anyway. I wondered whether, you're talking about when you're planting trees, we try and do a native species or look at the biodiversity. I wonder whether you included that, the kind of allergen levels of trees. I, as someone who's allergic to plane trees, just feel like the borough and London as a whole is just full of plane trees. And anyone with kind of breathing difficulties, asthma, etc., they really struggle with certain tree types. So I wondered if you included that in your thoughts as well.
Thanks, Councillor Borland.
Thank you. Firstly, on the contributions, potential for contributions for tree planting, one of our key communications has been with Trees for Streets, which is an organisation which facilitates donations for tree planting. And we get a huge amount of inquiries of people trying to donate. I know the parks have a very good kind of donation system, so that they're receiving donations, and we're looking to learn from them as the highways department. We don't at the moment, and that's why we spoke to Trees for Streets with a view to kind of formalise a donation programme. We have costed that in the action plan. It's a sizable amount of money, but it's costed and it's available. At the moment, we're just exploring, can we expand the donation programme that the parks department use into highways to kind of save that money. At the moment, we're still looking into that and investigating that, but the option is there. And then to answer your question about species and allergen levels and native versus non-native, we do consider allergen levels, and we are looking to design some kind of species selection, or process which kind of prioritizes the species that we need or that are most beneficial to biodiversity and that don't contribute to the allergen levels and don't cause huge amounts of issues. So I don't know if you wanted to add.
No, I think Eugene's covered it. Like I said, we're trying to create this matrix that we work through, which covers native species, allergen levels to try and really focus down on the right tree in the right place. And as Eugene picked up with the contributions, this is something we will take forward and try and learn from what our parks colleagues do in contributions for trees and parks. Obviously, the cost in the highway is higher, so we do need to help fund that somehow, because it is quite a large cost that a resident would have to cover. So whether we then do something with working through Trees for Streets to help facilitate that as well, that is part of the strategy to develop that.
Out of interest, can I ask, what does a tree on a street cost? Is there a big number you can give me?
Yeah, so to actually purchase the tree and plant the tree, and then in the highway to also excavate the hole, so we have to get our civil works contractor in to do that. It roughly costs around £800 to £900. However, that is caveated that you may need more than one hole. So when we dig down, there might be utilities there, which mean that we can't plant there. So it is a sort of a learning process, which we hope that our opportunity mapping will come into play then. So if we map the borough, understand where we can plant trees on our streets, especially for residents who want trees on their streets, we can then instantly give guidance on if that's possible or not possible. From what we find. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have anything further, Councillor Borland, or was that okay for now?
Sure.
Thank you. Sorry, just to come on to explore some of these issues as well. So in terms of the sort of key, probably one of the key policy issues, so the key policy issue that you've raised here is sort of extending the canopy cover by 10% or from 14% to 16.5% something. I mean, sorry, from all I've heard tonight, I guess the question is how, well, you've talked about how you'll do some of that, but I guess given the opportunities to sort of seem to be clashes here, obviously people potentially wanting more trees on their streets, but effectively, that's not necessarily very easy to achieve, particularly given the fact that these things will grow fairly large and then cause the issues of people being concerned that they're sort of abutting into their properties or whatever else. And presumably, I wonder if you could talk more about the opportunities and where you think you'll get this extra growth in the sort of tree numbers that will provide this extra canopy cover from. Clearly, we have some fairly thin pavements and stuff as well. So when you put, you're taking out some sort of planting trees, particularly on the sort of in the pavement and highways, and you've got these issues around utilities. Presumably, you've got water, electric, gas running under the thing. So actually finding a place where you can do that safely is quite an issue. So I wonder if you could just expand on how all that works.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. So we map and then we do it in terms of if we can get them in the footway, a tree in the footway, if there is enough width. And there are no utilities and we're not near a lamp column, those kind of things, then we will plant there. Where we can't, we then start to move into the carriageway, so into that road space, into the area, potentially the parking bay or where we may have lines. And we find that we do get more scope to plant there because there are less utilities. So we don't have the cables, like a lot of telecommunications cables go down the footway, the lamp columns, and then all the connections into the properties as well. So we have a little bit more space in that first section of the carriageway. The potential downside of that is it does get more expensive. So we move off the footway into the carriageway, prices increase, but there is more opportunity. So we start to then build this level of opportunity. So we have our quicker wins, which are our footways where we believe we can plant, and then we go into the carriageway where we think there is scope to plant an opportunity. So that's how we do it in the highways. In housing land, again, it's mapping the opportunities and then also working with the residents to understand where they want these trees within the housing estate. So this is predominantly on the larger estates where there is open space. And then we've also highlighted on housing where we have housing street properties. So it's also better maintaining the trees within those street properties. So when the property is, say, void, for instance, we would go in and hopefully inspect the trees there. If there's an opportunity to replant a tree, also plant a tree in that property. So it's doing both the estates and the street properties. Street properties is obviously a little bit more difficult because people are there and it is their private garden in a way once they are in that property. And then in parks as well. So it's mapping those opportunities within parks and starting to work around the boundaries of where we can plant.
Just to add, as part of the strategy, we really wanted to quantify these objectives, and we outsourced some data collection because we have a lot of good data on the trees that we own, but we don't have the numbers of trees that we don't own. So we outsourced to a company that have looked at aerial images, and we have a number of the total trees in the borough, which is 45,000 trees. So to increase our canopy cover by 2% in the 7-year period, we need to plant 1,125 trees approximately. So that's 160 trees per year. And in the year of 21 and 22, myself and my colleague Tom in Parks planted 120 trees using the Urban Tree Challenge Fund alone. So if we were taking that year into account, we would have been 2/3 of the way using external funding, just for information.
So yeah, that's very interesting to understand. I mean, I wonder, in a sense, obviously, presumably there's sort of some, as you've described, turnover of trees, in the sense that clearly you're having to fell some trees and then replace them with others. So presumably, as you're saying, sort of net, you need to do the 160 a year. Obviously, some will be felled in one shape or form. I mean, a number of this moves on to other issues. As I say, in a sense, I think what would be useful, and perhaps I'm just commenting on really what you've said so far, is some more communications as to sometimes, and in fact, I'm now thinking about it, we do get quite a few tree queries, whether they are, I've had one recently about a tree on a sort of the front of a council street property where it was clearly falling into the house. So I think you're going to be going around there to pollard it or whatever. So that's fair enough. I think but I mean, there's a number of issues. I mean, perhaps you don't have to answer all of them now, but where some FAQs on the council's website would be really helpful, possibly to us as councillors when we get the questions, and also of interest to residents, and probably stop you getting quite as many inquiries. But some of them are around, say, the size of trees. People tend to be concerned that if the canopy is quite large, that the roots are sort of going under their property and causing subsidence, which I'm not sure is always the case, but clearly people have those fears. The issues about allergens, I think people in particular sort of take against silver birches when they see them, may or may not be the right approach. So I think I'd certainly definitely encourage you to put as part of the strategy the sort of communications, and particularly where there are sort of frequently asked questions that could be covered off. I mean, a number of things, like there's been some trees felled in the park nearest where I live, where it's not quite clear why that is, or also whether they will be replaced in due course. I don't know how we sort of communicate that, because that is actually of immense interest. Perhaps I'll email you afterwards about that, but to local residents. And I wonder, so those are a few comments, but I'm interested in any thoughts you have on them. One of the amenity societies also provided some comments for tonight's meeting, which we passed on to you, but and hopefully you'll take those into account in sort of developing the strategy. But one of they had some more detailed questions. One was around the materials used at the base of trees, which they were concerned, particularly if you use asphalt at the base of trees rather than permeable materials that can ensure they're watered properly, perhaps, whether that was causing a problem. That I think they also made a point about how well is the strategy working of getting, I mean, it seems to work in some areas of getting, promoting watering by local residents of some of the street trees, and how well that's working. And in some areas, they suggested that, particularly in the more sort of town centre areas, maybe some cages were needed around saplings in a way that's done in some other areas. I think we do that as well in some cases, but sorry, I wonder if you got any thoughts on those points.
Thank you for that. So in terms of the FAQs, that is something we've been developing in the background whilst doing the strategy and actually realising what information we need to put on the website. And maybe it doesn't form part of the strategy, but is something that we've been developing separately to then roll out as part of the communication and to do more communication on that front. In terms of the comments that were sent through on tree pits, we agree we should be using permeable surfacing around trees where possible, and we have trialed quite a few different materials. In the paper that was sent over, I think Bishop's Park was raised as a good example, and we agree that. So that's a material called CDEC, and we have trialed that on some of our highway sites as well. We also use different not nicer, but a bit longer wearing material called EcoPave. We've tried that around trees as well, which is permeable. But where possible and where there is space to allow, we would always leave it open with soil. And if people want to, in a way, adopt that, as was mentioned in the paper as well, and plant those, we encourage that. We would like people to register that with us so we know that residents are doing this. In terms of watering the trees that was mentioned, we do water all of our new trees. Currently, because of the dry spring that we had, we're doing that twice a week. But as was pointed out, we are putting signs on these new trees to encourage residents where possible, where they have the means to water the tree a little bit more as well to help its survival. We do that for the first 2 years of the tree's life when, we need it to root in and to take hold. And in terms of cages, we do use cages where appropriate. So in some of our town centre areas, there are cages, and where we have issues around tree vandalism, we then will put cages around those trees to protect them. But ideally, we do like a tree not to be caged. So it is only when and where needed. Eugene, I'm not sure if I've missed anything you want to add to.
Yeah, no, now we're starting to talk about trees. I do remember lots of cases of trees, but particularly one of tree vandalism in one of the areas where it kept being chopped down. But are there any further questions from any members of the committee? So yeah, you'll have to come to the if you can come to the microphone, please, sir, and introduce yourself.
My name is David Hickman. I live on the Crabtree estate in Mallet Road. I just have a couple of questions. I mean, I frame this in the context of being very supportive of the idea of increasing tree cover in the borough. But I just wanted to highlight some issues. In the presentation, first of all, to me, it was disappointing that in the consultation list was not the residents themselves. We've talked a lot about communicating to residents and FAQs to residents, but I think, as the councillor here has indicated, there's a great deal of interest from residents about trees. Therefore, I think it might be appreciated by residents if they were asked what their opinions were while you were formulating this policy. So that's question one.
So I thought that it is due to go consult with residents, isn't it? As part of the strategy.
I didn't see I looked at the slide.
Yeah, sorry, the consultation will take, so that we're having a discussion this evening before the consultation actually goes out. So there will be a full consultation with residents.
Right, which takes the form not merely of communicating to them, but actually responding to what they say. I mean, in other words, you're genuinely kind of asking their opinions about what they want. Is that right?
Yeah, so I mean, the purpose of the meeting tonight is to sort of understand the design of the consultation that's going out. And so obviously, as members of this committee, which looks at these issues, we're feeding in some thoughts tonight. Obviously, there's going to be a full consultation which will take place on this strategy, which will come out of the work that the officers have done. And obviously, we're feeding in advance of that consultation.
Okay. So there will be a consultation. So the residents' associations, for example, will receive documents that are in draft form, not final form, for comments to be fed into that
Well, obviously, a consultation is a final document that people are going to be consulting on. So they say this is our proposed strategy.
Right.
So it depends what you mean by final versus draft. Obviously, it's draft in the sense that it's been consulted on, and then people are asked for their opinions. So
just to be clear, then, because this is quite an important point for me, you're saying that the document that goes to, say, residents associations or anyone who is a resident in the borough is really a final document or a draft document?
No, it's a proposed tree strategy that is being consulted on, that will be consulted on, I'm assuming. So it's a proposed tree strategy. So as with any consultation, once the consultation responses have come back, officers will go away and consider those responses in coming up with the final strategy.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. Secondly, I just want to, we've talked, I've listened to people talking quite a lot tonight about, how residents are very keen on adding trees and so on. There is a kind of, in the real world of a cost of living crisis, there is an issue here, which is that one of the questions that all residents are asked when they fill in an insurance form is how close a tree is to their house. And this affects the premium that they pay on their houses. So I wonder whether you are taking into account the difficulties for residents of facing extra costs, monthly costs, for having trees outside their house. And this particularly applies to things, this not only applies to planting trees, but applies to a problem you highlight on the council website yourself when you talk about old trees. And I think we're mostly talking about plane trees that are street trees in that context. And the Councillor Borland mentioned her allergy. It's not an uncommon problem with plane trees, which rain down pollution on the people below it. I take it for a start that there is no intention by the council to plant new plane trees, fresh plane trees as street trees. Is that right?
So the question isn't to me, it's to the officers.
I know that, but I'm addressing through the chair as it's...
No, indeed, yeah, fine. Yeah. Okay. So I'll ask officers. Obviously, they're the ones who answer the question.
Yeah, thanks. Plane trees are still being planted. They're very efficient at absorbing particulate matter.
I know.
And for that reason, they are still planted. We have inherited a tree stock that was planted before a lot of these issues were here. And we kind of have this balancing act of do we remove these trees which are causing issues such as allergies and sacrifice the benefits that they bring in terms of biodiversity and mitigating climate change effects. So it is difficult. We are trying to bear these things in mind, and certainly when it comes to planting trees near buildings or housing estates, it very much is right tree, right place, by the right person at the right time. Sorry, that's a little bit vague, but in plane trees, we still plant them. We have moved away from birch trees for that reason.
As street trees, though.
As street trees.
You still plant plane trees as street trees?
Yes, we do. Sorry.
I'm staggered. Anyway, so therefore, I wonder what happens when things become problematic for residents. I've in Rannoch Road, for example, the plane trees are 1 meter or less from the property line and are twice the height of the houses, and are not taken down by pollarding every 3 years.
Yeah, we try to pollard all our trees if they have been entered into a pollard cycle. every 3 years. If they have never been pollarded, it's quite detrimental to pollard them. Instead, they'll be reduced in accordance with British standards, which is 30% of a tree shouldn't be removed at any one time. In terms of kind of cyclical pruning, that's guidance that has been designed by the London Tree Officers Association in a thing called the risk mitigation strategy, which is it encourages cyclical pruning to avoid subsidence, all these issues which are when a tree becomes too big, it should be pruned cyclically. But hopefully with the new plane trees that we're planting, they'll be entered into a pollard cycle, or they'll be maintained at a smaller size if the context requires that.
And that can't be done for older trees. They just have to be twice as big as the properties, and you have to live with it.
We have to reduce them more regularly, a cost to us, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, you don't have any further questions?
I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you very much for the strategy that you've presented today. As mentioned, obviously you will be designing the final consultation document and putting it out. So can you remind me, when are you planning to put this out for consultation?
So our plan is to undertake the designing of the document, to get it to a standard which is right to be consulted on, and to finalise that. So we're looking towards the end of September for that. So September going into October for it to go out to consultation.
And how long is the consultation due to be?
That hasn't been defined yet, so yeah, but I can't answer that today.
Okay, I mean, we'd certainly encourage you to put it out for sort of as long as possible, as discussed, to ensure that sort of residents and residents groups have enough time to respond to the consultation. And obviously, presumably there's then a cycle to take comments on board and to come up with the final strategy. Do you know what sort of timeline you're looking at for that?
We haven't defined a timeline for that, but to go back to the previous point on the consultation, we'll make sure that we go through all of the different avenues. So it will go through our parks avenue to all the parks users, as well as wider to all residents, but to make sure that we get it to the right people in terms of the TRAs on the housing side as well. So it will go through all the different channels. And in terms of the feedback and processing that afterwards, again, apologies, we'll have to detail that out and share that.
No, I mean, I think we'd be interested in that. I mean, obviously, so you've heard all of the comments tonight. I won't go through all of them, but we're certainly interested in how you'll achieve the sort of plans to increase the canopy. I think we've heard about some of the pros and cons and difficulties of doing that. Interested in, and I think it's a sort of communications piece as well, as we've discussed. I think we'd be interested in some FAQs and also some explanation when there is planting of plane trees or birch trees or whatever, and just how residents can access lots of that information. It seems like you're planning to put a lot of that information out there, which will be, I think, welcome. And we, look forward perhaps coming back to seeing the final strategy in due course and how that's sort of progressing in the next few years. So thank you very much for the presentation tonight. And well, good luck with the strategy as well. Thanks for the work. So that's the end of the meeting. I'd like to thank everyone for attending or watching tonight's meeting. And the next meeting, which we've got a number of items for, will be held on the 20th of November this year. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you all.